Hi, this is Christine Daly. Welcome to WondAROMA. Man, I love that music. It's better than coffee, seriously. This is a podcast that gives an inside look at the flavor and fragrance industry. If this is your first time here, welcome. You might want to know what I'm up to with a podcast about flavors and fragrances. Well, I don't have to tell some of you. There is a lot to know. So I've gone out and tried to find some of the industry's most interesting and knowledgeable experts to talk about flavors and fragrances inside and out. So whether you're an expert, such as a perfumer or a flavorist or a product developer in a consumer product company, or even if you're a layperson and you want to know more about what you're wearing or eating, I hope you get something out of it. And tell your friends if you like it. This month's episode features Pia Long, most widely known for her blog called Volatile Fiction, a nerdy Finnish perfumer in England. Pia is a huge fan of cosmetics and perfume. Her first real part-time job was as a teenager at 13 behind a beauty counter in Finland. She qualified as a makeup artist for the London College of Fashion in 1996 and is now the technical manager of a company called Equinox in the UK. I asked Pia how she got her start in perfumery and also her views on the regulatory environment in the fragrance industry. So without any further ado, let's get on with the interview.
Actually, what I really would have died for is to get a job in Jim Henson's creative workshop, because what I was really interested was special effects and sculpting and all of that side of things. I wasn't particularly interested in fashion.
Very cool.
So much. I was really, really, really interested in all of that side of things, and I was actually taught by the same guy who designed Pinhead.
Really? Oh, wow.
So
that's amazing.
But even then, what was really hilarious is the things that I was getting really, really good marks from were all the kind of written distinctions from all the kind of cultural essays and you know, and I was thinking, oh, well, this is interesting, but I really want to do Jim Henson's.
Yeah, right.
Well, actually, no, that's maybe not what you're strong at, but
well, your talents sort of show themselves at certain points in your life, you know?
They do, and
yeah.
Because you often tend to ignore the things that come to you easily.
Yes.
Because that's easy.
Yes.
You know, that's not worth pursuing because it's so easy. It's so natural, like breathing. So you don't kind of necessarily invest more time in improving that even further.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
You have so much. You always try working hard at those things which you sort of aspire to but can't quite get right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a revelation over the years to kind of go, wait a minute, what if I worked a bit harder on the writing side of things? Maybe that could lead somewhere.
And it has. So at the London College of Fashion, is that where you discovered the intricacies of the perfume fragrance industry?
We had some cosmetic science there.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to make sort of mascara and lip gloss and face cream and that sort of thing. And bizarrely at the time, I wasn't particularly intrigued. I just thought, okay, well, this is really interesting, but I really want to go and work at Jim Henson's creative workshop.
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, I wasn't that obsessed by it, but it was sort of, I was really interested in the film and theatre, so I got really great experience in, you know, making films, and I even got to go to Hollywood and...
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I worked on the Phantom of the Opera for a couple of weeks and did quite a lot of theatre and all sorts of things. So it was really interesting, but the bells didn't kind of ring at that point when we did cosmetic science. So it came a lot later, after I'd graduated and was working freelance, and I was doing all sorts of things, from sort of fashion to theatre to TV, film, anything coming really. The difficulty was, as a foreigner in this country, I had pretty much no network whatsoever, no friends, no family,
right,
no professional contacts, and so I was literally trying to do this freelance thing from scratch.
And how old were you at this point?
Well, what was I, 24?
Okay.
So you're not really that well equipped to go out there and make something of yourself. And of course, this dear listeners, is in the days before the internet was big.
Of course, yeah.
We're talking about, mid-90s here.
Mm-hmm.
Internet was barely out of its diapers. And so, see, I used an American word there, influenced by your accent. So, I kind of thought, again, trying to be the pragmatic person, I thought, well, this is all very fun, and I was loving the film shoots, actually. I really loved working on film sets.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever enjoyed any work more than that, but
right.
the work wasn't frequent enough, and you used to get double booked, so you'd have one film director ringing you, and then you'd have another photographer ringing you, and of course they all wanted you on the same weekend or whatever, and then you'd have 2 weeks of nothing, and so I had to supplement my income by working for makeup brands like Bobbi Brown and Sisley, and
okay.
And so I actually have this strange claim to fame. I've worked behind the counter of every single London department store.
Wow.
Just when I was freelancing, I was also signed up to an agency, and so I've actually been literally in every store. I know what all their staff canteens are like.
Oh, that's great experience and knowledge. Yeah.
So, but then I thought, oh no, this isn't going to work. I applied to become a training manager for a UK fragrance and cosmetics distributor.
Okay.
They were importing some very nice brands like Tiffany and Diesel and all sorts of things. So I became their training manager, and during that time, we had this fantastic sales presentation from people who make Tiffany fragrances. And they came in and they had this really wonderful wooden box, which was, of course, a fantastic piece of sales theatre, sort of opening up carefully and all these tiny bottles of precious oils.
I could picture this, yeah.
It was kind of sort of holding them very carefully like they're rare diamonds. You know what I mean? That kind of,
yeah.
Oh, this is what goes into our perfumes. And, of course, that was probably true, but there were probably a lot of other things that went into the perfume too. But nevertheless, I was absolutely mesmerized at that point. I thought, hold on just a moment. Who makes these perfumes? How?
Wow.
And how do I do it?
Yeah.
It just kind of suddenly became this.
The light bulb went on.
Yeah. But at that time, I had absolutely no idea. I had this one kind of National Geographic book about how perfumes are made, and of course, it was mostly wonderful photographs and whatnot, and it was actually quite accurate with hindsight, but it was still very sort of romanticized and very much like a coffee table book. It didn't sort of give you instructions how to enter the industry, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
It's very much like, ooh, aren't perfumes interesting? And, well,
beautiful and romantic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it just didn't give you any help at all.
So you searched out the courses in perfumery, I assume, or what was the way you were going to find out how to do this, or how to find out more?
Well, the idea kind of went on the back burner for a while. It sort of stewed for a while, and I went and worked in the IT industry for a while, a couple of years, as a training manager, and meanwhile, all this cosmetic industry stuff was sort of forming in my head, and I kind of started to formulate a vision of what I actually wanted to do should I re-enter. And so, cut the long story short, I was very fortunate to find that after I'd moved out of London, that local shopping area was sort of revamping itself and launching a new Lush shop. And I knew at that time they weren't particularly keen on recruiting anyone from just outside a company to do something other than retail. So I kind of went in through the retail experience, but it took about 3 months, and then after that I was already helping to train their new managers and stores in crisis and things like that, which was very common at the time. I don't know what the policy is currently, but they tend to use experienced store managers to go and assist other stores.
I see. Okay.
And kind of train up newcomers.
And Lush is a very unique kind of a fragrance situation, because of their, they put more things on their packaging than most would. And they're very transparent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And they also use a lot more kind of expensive materials just in their toiletries, as pretty much probably anyone out there, which of course is sort of kind of hilarious when you're sort of thinking about the margins that go on in cosmetic industry generally, and then you think about they've actually put real Jasmine Absolute into, I don't know, a shower gel, and it's sort of like, whoa, what?
Right.
So, it is kind of very anomalous. They're quite unique in that way. And but on the other hand, their Perfumer in-house is, they used to have their perfumes made by another company, and then Mark took the Perfumer in-house, and him and his son have been mostly doing it, and I was, again, very fortunate to be added to that team as a junior, and I was assisting them mainly with promotional products and seasonal ranges, but also formulation and making bases and doing research. And
now you were asked to capture, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were asked to capture the scent of the store in Poole. Was it in Poole?
Well, that was sort of the end effect. But what actually happened is I was making fragrances for the Christmas range for that year, and there happened to be this bath ballistic that looked just like the Lush shop in Poole. And the style of perfumery was very much give us some scents that you think will fit this product, and then we'll say yes or no, and we'll throw the ones that we don't think are suitable in the bin, and we'll accept the ones that we like. And the brief was very open in that sense. They didn't tend to come to you and say, right, we'd like a sort of a herbal fragrance.
And at this point now, how much about perfume making did you actually know? Is this a more unconventional approach to perfume making to do this, or did you have a lot of knowledge at that point?
Well, I still don't feel I have a lot of knowledge.
Enough knowledge.
I certainly was capable of creating best-selling product scents, but the way I was doing them was quite lavish in the use of naturals because it was the Lush style.
Yes.
But perhaps not quite as lavish as what Mark and Simon were doing, because I was very fascinated by sort of structure, and I was very fascinated by aroma chemicals as a sort of a supporting act, if you like, whereas they preferred to sort of veer towards much heavier use of expensive absolutes and things like that. So I was kind of experimenting on my own, and I was also reading a lot. I was already studying on the course, and it was quite interesting to have to get your perfumes to pass the kind of the company style. So there was sort of an evaluation process there, actually, because, Mark would decide what goes and what doesn't. So it was very much like working for a client. So I didn't sort of do what I wanted to do. I did what I thought Mark would like.
I see. Yeah.
So it's the same as working for a client in any other setting. And in some ways, having been a makeup artist kind of prepared me somewhat for that, because you're working with directors and art directors and so on.
So tell me about this Christmas line you were working on.
Right, so it just basically was a bath bomb, looked like a Lush shop, and I thought, well, the only thing that should really smell of is like the Lush shop, because I didn't really think that any one scent particularly captured Lush, and although perhaps the one scent that maybe captures Lush might have been jasmine, come to think of it.
Okay.
Yeah. It had to be one, but so I kind of did a really geeky approach, and I looked at their purchasing of essential oils and aroma chems for the year, and literally looked at the tonnage bought in, and then filtered by strength of odor. So, for example, obviously you might be buying in a heck of a lot of musk, or you might be buying in a heck of a lot of, helion or something.
Right.
But if you've got rose oil in there and you're not buying in a ton, you're buying in, let's say, 100 kilos, you're still in there. Anyway, and so I kind of looked at the amounts used and then worked out a sort of basic skeleton, and then I went over it again and looked at the prominent notes in the best-selling products, and created this structure.
That's a really scientific approach. Did you realize you're a scientist under all of this art? And that was exactly, I think that was probably the best way, because not a lot of people would have chosen that direction, I think. If you were to give that project to somebody else, I mean, they might have just walked in the store and say to themselves, what does this smell like in here? And put something together.
Yeah, true, but I suppose there was an element of that in there too, because I'd spent a couple of years as a Lush store manager, and so, obviously I had a very good idea of what the Lush smell really like. So when constructing it kind of based on sort of spreadsheets and whatnot, I wasn't doing it based on that alone. It was definitely
of course, yeah,
based on odor impression as well.
Yes,
but,
of course.
And then I sort of kind of put it together to sort of top, middle, and base, and I had time to do one modification. It was actually terrifying. It's not what I would have. I mean, had I had time to do it the way I would have wanted to, I would have probably done about maybe at least half a dozen modifications, if not more.
Right.
But it went from a bath bomb scent to Mark in his typical way saying, "Hey, I quite like this. Why don't we bottle it up for our special event?"
Oh, wow.
And
you were like, what?
Yeah, and he sort of said, go back to the lab and work it up to a full fine fragrance. And I thought, oh my God, and had to go back and put it together to a fine fragrance.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the one modification.
And how did it do? How did it do?
It did really, really well.
Wow.
It sold out pretty much that year.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them sold at the special event, and then they sold the rest in a Gorilla Perfume store in London.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, very much in demand afterwards, and people were quite upset that they couldn't get their hands on it. And,
well, that feels good.
Yeah, but, hence limited edition and all that.
Yes.
And it's now selling on eBay for 3-4 times the original price, which is...
Oh, I didn't know that. I can actually get this. Oh, that's excellent.
They reformulated to 29 High Street. I don't know whether they changed the fragrance, but they repackaged it.
Okay.
And they're selling it in their pool shop right now.
Oh, that's good to know. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize I could get it. I would love to smell it.
Yeah, but, I mean, I really don't know whether they've done anything to it. But,
Now, I assume that those fragrances contain natural and synthetics, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of leads me to my next question. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here,
Sure.
but I mean, you and I both know what natural and synthetic ingredients are, but for purposes of the podcast, I mean, can you talk a little bit about each of those types of ingredients a little bit?
Sure. I mean,
what's the difference?
The main thing I kind of really want to stress is that there's an aesthetic argument where the beauty of, let's say, natural rose oil is really quite something else. The beauty of beautiful vetiver, beautiful patchouli, wonderful oak moss, which is sadly now quite threatened. All of those things are absolutely the cornerstones of fine fragrance and some of the best perfumes in the world. And aesthetically, they are in their own class. Yeah. However, when you talk about safety, the argument is completely moot. There aren't synthetic and natural materials. There are just chemicals. Because, of course, everything is made of chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you really need to talk about is individual materials on their own merits, one at a time, evaluated based on how safe are they to use, are they appropriate to use in this particular context, and that's it. You shouldn't have to emotionally separate them to natural and synthetic.
Okay, because natural is no safer or, it's, as you said, the word natural has taken on quite a marketing, position. But when you say seeing these things individually, do you mean rose oil individually, or do you mean the components of rose oil natural?
Well, there's argument for that too, because of course sometimes when you're evaluating something like methyl eugenol, which is carcinogenic, well, that's not a nice material. But I don't know how valid it would be to say, okay, well, we fed methyl eugenol to a rat for a week and then measured the levels in its liver and looked at tumor formation and then killed the rat, versus a tiny trace of methyl eugenol in a fragrance that's been already diluted in alcohol and applied to your skin. So it can be quite difficult. For example, coffee contains carcinogenic compounds, but coffee is not considered carcinogenic because there's also ameliorating chemicals in there that kind of, when you drink coffee, it's not actually carcinogenic. Take pesto, we eat a lot of pesto.
Mm-hmm.
I eat a lot of pesto.
Me too.
And but it's got methyl chavicol in there, which is again carcinogenic.
At certain levels, of course. This is all what it's about, is the level.
Exactly. Well, it's the level, it's the context, it's the method of exposure. Nothing can be declared 100% safe. There's no such thing as safe, not safe. It's not a binary on-off switch.
Mm-hmm.
It's only safe under these circumstances. And this is what a lot of the sort of cosmetic safety campaigners, a lot of the anti-fragrance people, anti-chemical people kind of miss the point that there is sort of the campaign for safe cosmetics that you cannot declare that something is going to be 100% safe. It's impossible. You can't even say that water is 100% safe, because if you get a thimble full of water in your lungs, you drown. It's not safe anymore.
Absolutely. Good point.
So, or if you drink, let's say, 5 liters of water within a space of an hour, you die because your brain swells up and you get very sick.
Absolutely.
You die.
And that's a chemical. Water's a chemical. I mean, everything's a chemical, as you say. Yeah. So a natural fragrance, an organic fragrance, all of them are fragrances, regardless of what they contain.
Right. I mean, I think, again, natural is very much a sort of an aesthetic statement, I think. And I think it's a very interesting creative challenge. I think natural fragrances are quite difficult to make. So absolutely my hat's off to people who do that. And they can be aesthetically extremely pleasing. But I wouldn't sort of promote natural as safer than. But of course, I mean, it has to be said, people who create natural product ranges know that in the consumer's mind, there's a silent safe in brackets after the word natural.
Yeah.
It's thought of as safer than. And, we all know that arsenic is natural, and we all know that uranium is natural, and belladonna and botulinum toxin and all these great things. They're natural too, but they're not safe at all.
So given that really nothing is 100% safe, then how that poses quite a task for organizations like IFRA.
Yeah.
And the rules are different in different countries. The EU is the strictest. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how they're dealing with fragrances now, because this is new, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a vast topic.
It is.
But, in an attempt to sort of summarize, a lot of consumers are under the misconception that IFRA is actually setting the rules, if you like. That's actually not the case. What's really happening is the pressure is coming from as high up as United Nations. You get NGOs, don't want to name any names, but particular NGOs pressurizing consumers into buying safe shopping guides and scaring them into thinking that shampoo is going to give their babies cancer, and all these sort of horrible stories. And I mean, some of them may be based on valid science, but the way they're being reported is geared towards maximum fear. And really there's this lacking, discussion on cosmetic and fragrance safety in a kind of balanced and fair way. That's really almost...
So they're not talking to each other. And just for purposes of clarification, an NGO is what?
So non-governmental organizations.
Okay.
So you've got all sorts of consumer groups and so on.
Okay, it's a consumer group. Okay.
Yeah, and so the pressure is coming from consumer groups, it's coming from dermatologists, it's coming from scientists who don't work in the field of fragrance but are looking at things perhaps in an isolated manner, maybe out of context. And then, of course, things like health and safety at work. A lot of these materials that we work with are highly flammable. The fumes can be very dangerous in a working environment. Just a simple spark from a mobile phone can start a fire. They can be quite dangerous. And some of the materials in high concentration, undiluted, the vapors can be toxic. So there's real considerations too from a kind of a industrial setting point of view, is how to best protect people who have to work with these materials in their raw form and in massive sort of 200-liter barrels and so on.
So what are the rules in Europe right now about fragrances? Are they laws? Are they requirements?
So there are various sort of layers of requirements. So first of all, you've got sort of chemical safety laws about chemicals at work. You've then got regulations that affect the labeling of fragrance compounds and finished products if they're going into household products. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the cosmetic regulation, which affects how products going into personal care and perfumes are to be labeled, so allergens.
Okay.
And then IFRA comes somewhere sort of down the line, really. It's not actually on the top of that list at all. Okay. And IFRA uses its own research institute of fragrance materials.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S. And the institute is not affiliated with the fragrance industry, but it's got scientists who are capable of testing things like at what point does a compound start to cause an allergy.
Okay.
And then they're trying to determine a safe use level at which point an allergy won't be triggered.
Okay.
And then they try to look at other properties like, is it likely to be a carcinogen? Is it likely to cause some other effects? And then they set recommendations which IFRA then adapts for the fragrance industry after consultation.
Do you think these, in your opinion, because my conversation with Paul last time, he felt that maybe IFRA or RIFM were being a little too conservative as far as allergens are concerned, that it doesn't affect enough people to justify banning an outright ban of certain things. Where do you stand on that?
Well, it's actually quite a difficult topic because, one, you've got the pressure from dermatologists from the EU. A lot of the EU opinions are, of course, based on formal opinions with a capital O from the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety.
Right.
And so those people are scientists, dermatologists, etc., who basically examine incidences of dermatitis and other allergic reactions in their respective countries, and then they formulate opinions on particular potential fragrance allergens and present those opinions to the EU regulators, who then consult the fragrance industry, and that's where IFRA often steps in to try to negotiate with them.
I see.
And so there's also a bit of misunderstanding about how allergies are formed. So, for example, hair color is actually a bit dangerous. The PPD content in them is quite allergenic. And people often misunderstand the allergic question as, well, if you're allergic to it, don't use it. The trouble is, the allergy actually develops over time. So you could be exposed to the compound for over a period of, let's say, 10 years. So you could be happily coloring your hair for 10 years, and then one day you go into anaphylactic shock and die.
I see.
So there haven't been any deaths from fragrance. Having said that, it's mostly just dermatitis. But when I say just dermatitis, feel free to Google images, and it's very distressing when you see a child with really bad eczema or dermatitis, or an adult for that matter, but some of them can leave you with permanent skin damage and be very disfiguring.
Absolutely. You're right. When you hear 3 out of 1,000, you think, oh, that's not many, but those 3 think that's many.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's very easy to kind of go, well, only 3% of the EU's population are allergic to fragrance. 3%, I don't care. Problem is, it's all very well until it's you, and for all you know, you could be developing a fragrance allergy as we speak, and it could just, one day you are suddenly getting a massive rash from your favorite perfume, and you think, what's going on? And it could be that you finally have become allergic to the allergenic compounds in oak moss, and you never knew, and it's just suddenly popped up.
Interesting. It's interesting. Okay. I see your point. And we are talking about, because we did bounce a little into hair color, but the fragrance also can cause this type of dermatitis reaction, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's not life-threatening. It's there's all these sort of things that you've got to think about, and obviously at the point where you discover that you've become allergic, if you can discontinue the use of that fragrance, then okay, you're safe. But one of the other things that gets often ignored in the allergy discussion is that the majority of our fragrance exposure is actually from household products and toiletries.
Right.
So when the EU is looking at sort of usage levels, they're thinking about fragrances that are going into face creams, deodorants, body lotions, shower gels, shampoos, laundry detergents, and so on and so on and so on. So if there is, something that's known to cause quite a lot of incidence of allergy, and it happens to be a popular ingredient used across all these categories, well, you are then going to be exposed to this material quite a lot. So when they evaluate their opinions on which materials should be listed and restricted or even banned, they also look at the tonnage used by the industry. And so how much are people going to be exposed? And so I would almost say that fine fragrance is kind of almost like a casualty in this process. And a lot of the natural materials are kind of a casualty of the fact that they contain some of these allergenic compounds, because, of course, the allergenic compounds are used in much greater tonnage as isolates.
In other products, yeah.
Right.
My understanding is that the way in which IFRA is, or even the EU is dealing with this, is to actually add some things to the label that are supposed to give information to the consumer about this contains this chemical. If you're allergic to this chemical, do you think that's a plausible way to handle it, or?
Well, the difficulty there is that I don't know a single person who really reads those labels.
Nor do I.
And I mean,
I ask everybody.
Since I was a teenager, and I don't want to tell you how many years ago that is, but many, many years ago.
More for me, Pia.
So, you know, I don't know a single person who checks those labels. I tend to find that people make a purchase, then if they are allergic to it, they discontinue use, and that's how it works. They buy something, and it's kind of, okay, well, this gave me a rash, and then they give it to a friend or sell it on eBay.
No matter what the label said.
Right.
Yeah. So
and I also know people who go to great lengths to use things that they are allergic to. So they will spray it in their hair, or they will spray it on their clothes because they like the scent so much.
Really?
Yeah. So, oh my God, this perfume gave me a rash. How can I still wear it? But then you get the other end of the spectrum where people are deliberately being sort of frightened out of their skin to become worried about, oh my gosh, the fragrance industry is trying to poison us. And so then they demand, there's an increased demand for sort of fragrance-free products and things. And then there's a whole other kind of ethical dilemma when products are marketed as fragrance-free when they're clearly not.
Right. Well, that brings me to this article in Odoo magazine and online. Well, you can buy it in print, but there's a magazine called Odoo which you have contributed to. You have an article in there in the first edition, and the title. Can you tell me what the title is of your? I'm like, I printed out the wrong thing.
Your nose is a snowflake.
Your nose is a snowflake. Oh, it was a wonderful, I mean, it had a lot to do with scent memory and stuff, which we're really not talking about. But what I want to say about the magazine is that there is an article in the magazine called Perfume Haters, which is very interesting, and it actually, the article starts talking about a player on the Canadian curling team that had a reaction to a fragrance an opposing team member was wearing. Yeah. And strangely enough, or not so strangely enough, she was from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Halifax, Nova Scotia in 2000 was the first city in the world to enact a complete ban on all perfume. All perfume, from shampoos, conditioners, deodorants, hairspray, you name it, in all public places like libraries, offices, hospitals, classrooms. I mean, so I think this is an example of it taking this too far.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you know, can you ban somebody, I don't know, eating garlic and then having garlic breath? There are plenty of things that we find that other people do that kind of invade our personal space. But usually when people say that they get an allergic reaction from smelling someone else's fragrance, that's psychosomatic. It's a type of anxiety attack.
Yes. Yep.
So that needs to be treated with sort of better psychiatric education and better understanding of kind of mental illness and anxiety reactions, and how that kind of panic about misinformation about chemicals can incite this sort of reaction in people. I mean,
That's
I think,
right.
you know, it's actually responsible because it creates these sort of anxieties that can result in real physiological symptoms. I mean, people can actually have increased heartbeat, they can feel nauseated, they can feel faint, they can feel their throat closing.
Yeah, all of the classic
it's a real
flight or fight.
Reaction.
Yeah. We've been having this sort of discussion on LinkedIn based on your blog, your latest blog post, which is entitled, that I printed, which is entitled, Why is the fragrance industry so secretive? And they, and really the point is they're not secretive.
Yeah.
You know, they're not trying to hide something. Yeah. They're being asked to disclose certain things that might not even be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And I've made many sort of comparisons really in the article, but there was also a really interesting comment when the article was discussed on the Perfumer and Flavorist page on LinkedIn, and one industry person said, well, you know, would it be fair if we said to Coca-Cola you have to print the formula on your bottle? Well, it wouldn't be, because that would be them, you know, destroyed.
Absolutely.
So I think it's entirely fair that certain things can remain a trade secret. And the difficulty comes from general mistrust in big business, general mistrust in governments, sometimes with good cause too, but problem being that if there is really quite a sort of almost an atmosphere of almost over-cautiousness in the regulatory landscape with fragrances, as the industry tends to feel. I mean, a lot of people struggling day to day with trying to formulate fragrances that have no hazard labels if they're going into an air freshener, or have no allergens if they're going to a toiletries product. You know, they tear their hair out on a daily basis trying to figure this out. And meanwhile, natural materials are being endangered. All these natural materials that probably the same people who warn about scary chemicals would like to see used more widely, and ironically, this scaremongering is actually leading to the destruction of the naturals business. So it's a kind of a very bad atmosphere all around of scientific illiteracy and exploiting of fear. And you know, it's no joke, actually.
It's not a joke. And, you know, it's also, you know, we haven't touched on it, nor do we wish to go here, but the flavor companies have a similar challenge because, you know, you in your article, on your blog, you said that, you said that food companies must list their ingredients, but really what they're not listing are the flavor ingredients. So indeed. It's a similar issue, and these things are consumed. So, you know, there's other testing that needs to be done on those. And putting things on the label is not the solution as far as I'm concerned. But you know, and we all say this, it's almost turned into rhetoric now. It's like consumers have to be educated, but you can't educate consumers in a scientific way, you know. So there's got to be more trust. And how do you gain more trust? As you become more transparent in the areas where you can be. I guess
so, and I think trust is absolutely the key word here. And this differs culturally quite a lot. I mean, Finland, where I'm from, the astonishing thing is that although the government and its associated bureaucracy has its flaws there, as anywhere, generally the government is sort of viewed in a far more positive light in Finland. I mean, certainly when compared to, let's say, the States. In the UK, sort of a bemused kind of frustration is probably the best way to describe how people in the UK view their government. But in the States, it's sort of outright sort of hatred and mistrust. And, you know, there's sort of growing global atmosphere of conspiracy theories and feeling that the government is out to get us, big business is out to kill us. There's fear being whipped up about all sorts of topics, and sometimes there's a kernel of truth in it. You know, there's certainly, you know, things like surveillance and whatever. I mean, those are all really problematic issues, but then it doesn't help when actually there are segments which are operating, if anything, too overcautiously. So, I mean, I would say that where we are with fragrance marketing, it's kind of cracking a walnut with a hammer, you know. You don't need to go to the sort of lengths that we've already gone to protect consumers, because you are at a point where we're about to add 100+ ingredients that have to be listed on labels.
right.
in the EU, and who is really going to be reading them? Who are they trying to protect? The context is so important with all of this. And I kind of get the feeling that in the EU, fragrance is viewed almost like a easy to eliminate risk. So they're not going after the tobacco companies. They're not going after, alcohol companies. They're not going after cars because, can you imagine? I mean, that would just be impossible. So they're kind of looking around for things. Okay, well, we want to make consumers feel safe. We want our products to be safe for people. And so what are the things we can eliminate? Oh, look, let's look at fragrances. They're completely unnecessary. They don't add anything to the product. They're a useless frivolity. So we can just eliminate them altogether. And I think if EU bureaucrats had their way, they would just ban fragrance full stop. That's the feeling I get.
That's really horrible.
You know, and so
just because of the psychological the impact the fragrance has on one's, and you do touch on that in this article in the magazine is, the fragrances. In fact, I was doing some reading about this because my brother is a nosmic. He can't smell anything. I don't know why. It might be sinus nodes or something, but people who can't smell things actually have a higher level of depression, and I don't want to be the I would have to reference that what I was reading, but that's what I've read, because fragrance plays a lot into your mental state.
It does.
Food
it's actually quite unsafe not to smell something.
Absolutely.
You can't smell burning, you can't smell if food is awful.
So I wonder what Halifax is like. It's, do you walk into a bakery and what happens there,
Right.
Right, you get out. It smells like bread in here.
Indeed, but that's a real problem because you can, we are all so suggestible. And so if you make people think that smelling a smell is going to harm you, then they will believe it. And when they believe it, they will react to it anxiously, and they will suffer real physiological symptoms, which then reinforces that belief, and then you're into this horrible tumbling,
psychosomatic situation.
Then you're down the rabbit hole. And it's actually it makes me really angry that there are people making people anxious for no reason. There's no reason to fear fragrance. I mean, asthmatic reactions are another matter. I suffer from asthma a little bit, and I've had 2 asthmatic reactions to fragrance in my entire life, having worked with aroma chems and fragrances and everything, only 2.
Wow.
And one time was in a basement which had been deliberately sprayed with heavy perfume. It was completely saturated. And another time was when I was decanting a lactone straight from a
okay, so you're sensitive to that
and
lactone.
It was just kind of really blast in my face.
Right.
But those aren't normal use circumstances.
No.
And I would say that asthmatics, if they're going into, let's say, a beauty hall, I dislike the habit of fragrance halls which have been deliberately sprayed with lots of fragrance. It's not fun for anyone because you can't actually shop there properly anyway.
Right.
You can't tell one fragrance apart from another at that point.
Well, there's stores in the mall that do that. I forgot the name. My kids shop in there, and I can't go in there.
Yeah.
It's so strong.
So that's not cool.
No.
That doesn't actually help shopping.
No.
And that's actually unpleasant for asthmatics. But, so that's legitimate.
Yes.
But somebody wearing a fragrance that they perhaps don't like and saying, oh my God, that's making me asthmatic. If it's actually just evaporating from a person's skin, it's at that point really not capable of causing asthma anymore.
True, that's
But
true.
if that person pretty much sprays it in their face, then sure.
Yeah, that's
So
a good distinction.
Let's help people who have asthma. Let's help people who have allergies by not overspraying the fragrance and not overspraying perfume halls. But at the same time, there needs to be a lot more balanced discussion about what's real and what's psychosomatic. Well,
Agreed.
That's a horrible way to say it. Psychosomatic is real, but it's just
different. It is real, yeah. No, absolutely. It's a real, it's very scary to have an anxiety attack or an asthmatic reaction. So I think I understand, we all understand where things are, and things become more complicated because there's a movement now of more independent artisan perfumers who say, okay, I don't like anything that's out there. I mean, Paul is a good example.
Yeah.
I want to make my own.
Yeah.
Now, obviously the people, depending on where you live, you have to follow certain rules. But for the most part, the independent are learning on their own. So they're using things that maybe, I don't know, they shouldn't be. And that's a whole other thing to deal with as far as teaching, instructing. And there's really no sort of clearinghouse where they can find, here's the country, here's what you can and can't do. And maybe there's a need for that to help them out.
I mean, in the UK, you can look at sort of information on government websites about cosmetic regulation, health and safety, and things like that. And
that's good.
You can contact, for example, the British Society of Perfumers and try to see if they could point you in the right direction. IFRA has all of its standards published for free for everyone, even if you're not a member.
Right.
So you can go and have a look at that. And, suppliers can sometimes help you with giving you some tips on use levels and appropriate carriers and all sorts of things.
Yes.
But it's still fiendishly difficult for an indie to start from scratch.
Yes.
Because you kind of don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so when you kind of get that eureka moment of, I really want to make perfume, you sort of almost don't know where to start looking.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the information that you find by Googling is actually wrong, and some of the courses you might go on might be taught by people who don't really know what they're talking about, and so it can get really difficult.
Absolutely.
Actually, to sort of sort out the correct information from the misinformation. So there's definitely room there for more open discussion, for more education, for more resources. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think as that indie perfumery movement grows, I think it's going to, it's going to happen. I was talking to Karen Dubin from, I don't know if you know Sniffapalooza.
Yes.
But I've been, I speak to Karen, I've spoken to her a couple of times, and we were talking about just that thing about creating sort of even an organization that would support this group of people who want to learn and give them the accurate information.
I mean, there's Institute of Art and Olfaction, which has started up in the States.
Oh.
Could become such an organization. They do lectures and all sorts of things, and they started an Indie Perfume Award as well. And they seem to have some interesting lecturers and people coming in to sort of help, really, but also generally just enjoy fragrance and enjoy fragrance appreciation.
And have the credentials, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, they could go somewhere, but I think there's need for more organizations like that, which are sort of locally accessible, because as much as I would like to hop over and visit this institute, it's not really practical.
No, not from the UK,
Not from
or
the UK,
Finland.
But even in the States, it's a vast country, you kind of need local organizations which can support people. And I don't think the indie perfume movement is going to happen. It's already happening, and it's the ship has sailed. We're doing it now. It's happening.
True.
And so there's a lot of people who are at early stages of figuring out whether they actually want to try to make a living out of it or whether it's just going to be an expensive hobby. And that's a whole other subgroup of people who actually are treating fragrance making much like someone might pick up a photography course and then decide, I'm going to buy some expensive kit, but I'm not obviously going to give up my day job.
Right.
And this is quite a new thing for perfumery, where people are doing it as a sort of a sideline. And, there needs to be more education for people like that too, because even if they're just making the products for themselves and their friends and family, they still need to be safe to use.
Yeah. And there's a really good resource on a website where you have some participation called Base Notes.
Yeah.
Basenotes.net is a really nice place to go to learn from a variety of people.
The forum side of it grew very much sort of organically from just fragrance chatter to international meetups.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I was involved in organising the first UK one. And really whole kind of friendships have been formed and communities have kind of popped off and gone and done their own thing from there. And it's really become quite a source also for the industry, because you can easily see what consumers are thinking about your latest releases, and you get lots of interviews and articles on the front page.
Yeah, that is really
so
nice.
It's a really great place for anyone who likes fragrance for any reason. But there's a great DIY section there too for people who are trying to help each other figure it all out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very active. I mean, I check it every single day, and, it tells you, as you say, where you can get ingredients and where you can get information. Yeah, it's definitely a great website.
And, so I still do go on Base Notes regularly, and I look at their articles, and, I'm still in touch with a lot of people, and what actually happened is I made some lifelong friends from there, and so we get together every year. I organize a little perfume tour in London.
You still do it?
Yeah, and we sort of communicate on Facebook and email, and I follow their blogs.
Oh,
but
nice.
As far as kind of information online for perfumery, there aren't really that many brilliant sources, I would say. I mean, what's worth doing is looking up some courses. The Perfumer's World course is potentially interesting.
Okay.
I've been on it myself, but I hear that it could be useful for people who are trying to figure out if it's for them or not.
Right.
And there's some really good perfume blogs I follow, like the Candy Perfume Boy, Thomas, who's become a friend too, the Silver Fox, Now Smell This.
Those are great. Yeah, and also Katie Puckrick has a great...
Yeah, Katie's brilliant.
Yeah.
Nick Gilbert, also a friend who has finally got his own website, and his reviews are sort of from quite an informed perspective because he works directly with the perfumers at the Halligans. So he's kind of sort of curating and evaluating products as they're being made, so his reviews are definitely worth a look. And then Bonkers About Perfume, Vanessa. She writes in a fantastically sort of English, eccentric way, really entertaining. Persole's, his specialty is really interviews. I think he manages to get really good.
He does. I subscribe to Persole's. Yeah, it's excellent.
So that's kind of his special thing is he gets access to a lot of really interesting industry figures, and his interviews are really good. But in terms of kind of how to, then you start getting a bit stuck again. And there's quite a good Yahoo group called Perfume Making, which has people on all levels sharing information and files. Again, some of it useful, some of it's not so useful.
Right.
So you're still faced with having to work it all out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of hoping that you find some good suppliers, hoping that perhaps someone might mentor you, and reading lots of books. And you can piece it together. You can get to a point where you figure it all out.
Now, can you tell me, I'm going to take a right turn here because I know you work for a company called Equinox.
Yeah, Equinox Aromas.
Equinox. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about what Equinox does?
Well, Equinox has been sort of supplying largely the aromatherapy industry, natural cosmetic industry, people who make candles, a couple of well-known UK high street brands, and all sorts of people with sort of fragrance and flavor materials and some vegetable oils, cosmetic ingredients, that kind of thing.
So ingredients and fragrances or
some fragrances too,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So they've got a catalogue of existing fragrances, and I'm currently adding to the catalogue. So some of the fragrances I've made for them have sold, and then we're doing some
good.
Mm.
Oh, that's
excellent.
So,
it's really, really interesting work, and I mean, they've been going for 20 years, but they've only recently got a web presence, and they kind of recently sort of started to reach out a little bit, but it's been purely word of mouth, and it's a very small family company, and so, he's not out for world domination, but at the same time, one of the sort of best-kept secrets in the industry, if you like.
Yes, and you are their
technical
guru there, or?
Not a guru.
Okay, technical manager there?
Technical manager or the poor person who has to do all the regulatory stuff.
Yes,
good.
So
I do control, I do regulatory stuff. I work on a piece of software that helps produce IFRA certificates and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then perfumery is a sort of a part of my job.
Great. Wow, that sounds like a very diverse day. I mean, it must be really interesting.
It's the same, and that's how I like it.
And you're always learning in this industry for sure.
Exactly, and that's why I like it so much.
Me too.
I only know a tiny piece of it, and always learn something from people you talk to or projects you take on, and it's really fascinating.
And I would love to encourage people to get out to these events, wherever these events are. There's some on the west coast of the U.S., the east coast. There's England. There's the British Society. Is it the British Society of Perfumery?
Yeah, perfumers. Yeah.
Perfumers, which they have their regular events. So I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to
Nope.
interrupt. But said, a lot of these societies are becoming quite open to people coming in who don't currently work in the industry, who are just sort of curious, and I think that's a really, really good way to go forward.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And make it more open.
And I also know that the flavor industry does the same thing. So, and you can meet people and learn that way too, instead of sitting behind a computer all day.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So, I think those are all the questions I have for today.
Brilliant.
And I thank you so much. It was a complete hour here. I think we're gonna have a lot of meat here to publish on our podcast. So, but I thank you, Pia, very much. And that, my friends, was Pia Long. And yes, it was kind of long, but she is one interesting person. I encourage you to Google her and find all of her writing. And, of course, don't forget to check perfumersupplyhouse.com, our blog, where I'll post some show notes to links to everything Pia and I chatted about. So, thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.